You're listening to the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tessl. Welcome back, and it's time for another monthly recap on the AI Native Developer. My name's Simon Maple.
And I'm Guy Podjarny, or Guy-Po.
And so we're going to cover all the sessions that happened in September. First of all, of course, you had a session with Tamar on enterprise AI. Really, really insightful.
Tamar is amazing. We'll cover some topics. We talked about Glean and enterprise search, but also a lot of learning of how to build this type of AI product.
Yeah, very interesting. And then I spoke with Omer Rosenbaum, also the co-founder of Swim. Really interesting about how you can use AI to keep your documentation up to date and also inform developers of when they're touching code that has documentation associated with it. Really insightful sessions there. And then a fellow podcast host, Caleb Sima, you spoke with him.
Caleb is excellent. That was no surprise. He does host the AI security podcast. And surprise, we talked about AI security on it and had really good conversations. I think I was maybe like a bit more blabbery, opinionated in that conversation. It is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart with Sneak and Search.
Oh, two geeks talking about security. That must have been a dull podcast.
It was a delight.
Was it really?
Right. It's like this big love fest of is all going down. It was actually like a positive leaning view on AI security. But really enjoyed that conversation. We'll share a few highlights here. And yeah, Kevin's awesome as always.
Amazing. And to round off the month, we had Felipe Aguirre Martinez, who was actually on earlier this week with his session. And yeah, Felipe reached out to us to chat about various things that we were talking about in the podcast, and I explored various things that he's doing. And lo and behold, we had him on the podcast. He came over to London to chat with us and give that podcast all about how he develops using AI, such that he's actually trying as much as he can, rather than writing code, but to actually build an application through prompts and specifications. So really interesting. We'll cover all those in more depth about our learnings and various topics. But for now, Guy, I absolutely love talking with you. I've got someone who I think is that little bit more professional, a little bit more eloquent. So Guy, if you wouldn't mind leaving for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah,
we're just not recording.
I know, but Guy, we're gonna try something new. This isn't anything on you. This is just an experiment we're trying. So
I'll indulge you, but I'm going to call HR.
Okay. So. Yeah. If you leave this room and go to the building next door, that's where HR is. So joining me is Ben Galbraith. Ben, please join. And Guy, make sure that the door fully closes so we can have a proper. There we go. Ben, have a seat. Welcome to the AI Native Dev podcast. How are you?
Great, Simon. Great to be here. I'm flattered, and I don't think I'm as charismatic as you've led people to believe, so hopefully it won't be too big.
Well, we'll judge you over the next 10 minutes and then make a decision based on that, shall we?
Oh, that makes it all better.
So, Ben, tell us a little bit about your illustrious career till now.
All right. I'll give you should I aim for like a 20, 25-minute survey?
Absolutely, yeah, let's do that.
I'll just give you a quick highlight reel. I've been professionally developing software my whole career. I got started early. I think I started professional development when I was 12, left high school and secondary school, what you call secondary school here, midway through to work for Acer full-time, and just done a lot of stuff since then, working on top of major platforms and eventually working to make those platforms better. Some of the highlights of that time period include leading product design and engineering for Walmart's global e-commerce stuff. I worked at Mozilla doing dev tools for Mozilla. And I went to Palm. Palm had this big swing at this moment in time, maybe you remember, where they wanted to make the web the operating system that led on mobile. And I was part of that. I don't want to call it a misadventure, but but I had a great time. Yeah. And then I was part of this thing called Ajaxian that was part of leading the Web 2.0 and Ajax movement of the era. There was a conference series too. That was a blast. And most recently, I've been at Google. I was at Google for about 8 years. I led product and design for this thing called Firebase, which had this vision to sort of remove all the toil of app development for developers so you can just focus on what made your app special. And I spent most of my time at Google on the Chrome team, working on the web platform and making the web better. That was amazing, working with just incredibly talented product managers and engineers and designers, working to make Chromium better, working to make V8 better, Media Codex, which is just doing a FaceTime with my family, which I do all the time. They're still in the US right now. And it just struck me how amazing codecs have become. And it was a real pleasure to work with some of those guys. And and a bunch of other stuff at Google, driving initiatives like Corporate Vitals and Baseline. Anyway, that's kind of a highlight reel of what I've been up to.
That is real. Most people don't do half of that in their entire career, Ben. That sounds amazing.
You're like a flattering machine. I want to be on the podcast more often.
Just wait for my next question, Ben.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So Google, that great company, Google, really good employees. They really look after their staff, don't they? What would make you,
where is this going?
what on earth, what possessed you to go from an amazing company like Google, leading so many different technologies and such an amazing research group, sunny, glorious California. What made you leave all that and come to rainy, cold London to work for this? Yeah, he's got work for Geico of all people for a startup called Tessl. What on earth would make you do that, Ben?
Oh, the way you put it, now I'm having second
I
thoughts.
know. I'm saying it myself, and I'm questioning myself too.
Oh, that's a great question.
This has turned into a therapy session.
I do have the weather conversation
Okay.
with my wife from time to time.
Really?
So,
Yeah,
That's maybe the most painful part.
It's good that you're bringing her across the pond in end of fall, winter. That's when the UK really shines.
Press, we'll talk about relocation logistics in a minute. But getting to the Google thing, yeah, I've been thinking about doing a startup again for a while. I've done a bunch of startups, and Google's an amazing place. But 8 years is a long time. And I've been feeling like it's time for me to get out and do something different. And actually, I had this funny moment. I don't think I mentioned it in my survey. Guy and I have been friends for ages. We crossed paths early in my career when I was at Walmart and he was at Akamai. And it was fun to see his journey at Sneak. And I had the chance to check in with him regularly along the way. And we had this funny moment in February this year where I texted Guy and I said, hey, I'm thinking about leaving Google to do a startup. And I described what I had in mind using principles that we now call AI native development. And he replied with this sort of wry emoji smile saying, we should probably talk. And I've made a change too. And at first I just felt like, yeah, it sounds great, but London. I don't know that I could do London. And then I came out in the summer, you remember, and got to spend time with Guy and meet the team here at Tessl. I was blown away. I was blown away at learning more about Guy's vision, and just meeting you and the rest of the Tessl team just seemed, to be fair, maybe present company, except the rest of the team. Pretty amazing folk. And I walked away from that. I came here feeling like I'll at least have this moment with Guy and explain to him why this is too big of a change for me right now. And maybe I'll see if I can be an advisor to the company or something. And then I left that visit feeling like, wow, I have to be a part of this team. And I was fortunate that you and Guy and the rest of the team maybe felt a little similarly about me being a good fit. And then I had the difficult conversation with my family. But I have to explain, we've had a history of adventures as a family. We lived in Hong Kong for 2 months when I first started at Google, and we loved that. We still talk about it all the time. And when I talk to my family about both sort of the professional opportunity and just the chance to have another family adventure, to be honest, we all took a leap and felt like this could be a really special thing for us. I did not talk about the weather with my family. We looked at like expat videos on YouTube, and the weather came up over and over again. My wife turned and looked at me and said, this was not part of the deal, but I'm sure it'll be fine.
And very briefly, because I think Guy's coming back from HR now, and they're bored. The number of complaints he has for me, they're bored with it. They just turn him away. So he'll be back any second. If you was to kind of like think of a couple of things that have surprised you, or that you've been super pumped about learning and doing at Tessl, what those couple of things?
Two big surprises so far. First one isn't at Tessl, just has to do with London itself. I've long said that I thought New York City was one of my favorite cities, maybe my favorite place in the world. And I've been to London many times through the course of my career. I had folks that I managed in London when I was at Google, but there's something about being here now, because I spend most of my time here in London. I love the city. I love the English countryside far more than I expected. And that's been a huge surprise. I love it here. But getting to Tessl, the other thing that's been surprising is, I knew from my visit in London how amazing the Tessl team were. Present company, me maybe being the exception, but I've been really surprised at how many developers I've met who share the vision that we've been talking about, that you and Guy have been talking about in the AI Native Dev podcast, that people are seeing this exciting possibility of going further than using AI as a sort of code completer and AI co-pilot, rethink software from the ground up. And anyway, it feels like it's in the water. And we're all sort of asking ourselves, how would we rethink the way that we build software? And I feel like at Tessl, that's been maybe my biggest surprise, is how many people are rooting for this movement that we're trying to create and really want to be a part of it.
That really resonates with me, actually, because I was at a user group presenting last week, and I was a little unsure as to when I'm giving these messages or talking about where the future's going, and people were actually quite receptive to it. Because I thought there would be like levels of fear or levels of uncertainty, but that people were actually keen to learn more and keen to and want to get engaged with the existing AI dev tools
Yeah.
and wanting to explore them. But yeah, that really resonates with me. I see guys actually coming back, so we should. So yeah, and wonderful to hear all the amazing things that you've said about Gaipo. And yeah, we'll chat later. And to the listeners, we'll probably hear from Ben maybe in the future as well, maybe running a session or two. But Ben, great to see you. Looking forward to working with you.
Like we said.
Kick Ben.
Don't get too comfy. Jeez.
So you guys done yet?
Yeah, how was that?
There's a
time?
number.
Oh, really?
So it's,
If I had a penny every time you told me that, man. Cheers, Ben. This month, you released a really interesting blog about how AI tools can be positioned. Tell us a little bit about that.
So yeah, I had a chance to write down finally this sort of mental model I have about AI solutions that I have been stewing on for a good year plus, a year and a half, around how to think about this sort of messy world of AI solutions. And it's true for the dev space, but it's also true for other domains and what I've seen as an investor. And I don't want to repeat the blog post here. You should check it out on the Tessl blog. But at a high level, it talks about how AI solutions can be mapped across these two dimensions. One is change. So how much do I need to change the way I work to be able to use this product? And the other is trust, which is how much do I need to trust it to get it right for it to be useful to me. So maybe just give a couple of examples. The change trust, Synthesia is a good example of it. Synthesia is a text-to-video solution on it. So create videos with text. That's an entirely different way of creating video. And question about whether you can just use it as a co-pilot to the way we create videos today. It's a total reinvention of how you're doing it, which gives them the opportunity to just entirely replace all sorts of bottlenecks and problems that they had, but it's a big change. Like the people involved in producing a video, a training video or a media video, whatever, in a company need to do things that are entirely different. You have to rethink the supply chain. Some people get startled by it. Maybe it's not the same skill set you want in the team. So it's a big change. But really, I think big kind of disruption opportunities, a new startup coming into that space, and an opportunity to really rethink the problems in a domain. The other axis is one of trust. And so how much do I need to trust it to get it right, even if it didn't require me to change how I work? I think the simplest example there is the robo-taxis. And so if you pull out an Uber app or something like that, and you call a taxi and it arrives, the car arrives, you get in, you get dropped off at a location, you get off. It's the same experience whether a human drove that car or if it's AI driving it. And so very little change in how you work, but massive amounts of trust, right? Like you need to trust that this car will get you there alive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a good example. So those are like two dimensions. And when you think about AI solutions, you can plot them to say how much change is required to get this, how much trust is required to get this. And what you find is that the tools that get the most adoption today are at the bottom left. They're in that sort of low change, low trust, right? So Copilot, for instance, for development, you're just typing in a letter, it plugs into how your code's today. You can eyeball the result and say if it's correct or not. It has some security implications. You don't review it as well, but you can use it very quickly. So it just, as long as it works often enough, it just makes you better. No reason not to use it. But it's incremental. It doesn't entirely address any problems. It doesn't rethink the workflows on it. But still, that's where we see the most sort of action in things that can help you today. No change, no trust required. And then, of course, the last quadrant is that sort of top right, which is what we call the AI native future, which you hear us here talking about AI native development and spec-centric and all those things. Like, well, that's a far cry. So anyways, that's the mental model in a nutshell. And I have more details, more examples, more how to think about yourself and charting your journey between those on the panel.
That got shared a lot. Tell us a little bit about the feedback. Any points that kind of made you think further about it?
Yeah, it was fun to see. As I said, I've been brewing this for a while now. So I got a lot of feedback over the year from smart people around it. So it was good to get a lot of kind of response, people liking it and reposting it. It's fine. You'd get some positive comments on LinkedIn is all nice. But I think a better indication is when someone on their own initiative posts about it, talks about how it works. What I found most useful is that people talked about their domains and how this applies to them. So I'm happy to hear that they're using it and they find it useful. And I also liked it the same week, just before, I think, Microsoft and Salesforce both had big AI announcements. It was nice to see how they both chose different paths. There's Microsoft Copilot Pages, which really tries to create this sort of funky way in which people can collaboratively edit the document. Multiple people, each with AI assistants, edit the document and maybe combine the apps. So I think that's firmly in the change path. You look at it, it feels weird. It feels odd to think about it. And maybe they got it right, maybe they didn't, but it's definitely a change from how we edit today. And Salesforce launching this Agentforce thing with automated agents, which is very much the trust path. It's like same work, you open the ticket, and it's just instead of a human fulfilling that ticket, it might be an AI agent, but you have to trust that agent got it right.
Yeah.
You have to have that element. And so anyways, it was a nice, timely demonstration of how there are different ways to tackle using AI to improve our kind of efficiency, our lives, how we do things.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, when I was doing the session with Felipe and we were looking through a number of different tools, it made me think about, I'm starting to think about this now in the quadrants about where things sit. And as I mentioned to Ben, I gave a session where I was walking through a number of different tools last week in London. And I was trying to work out where they should be positioned. And it was interesting because Felipe, when he talked about using things like Claude, he wanted to then take that code and put it into an IDE to play with it afterwards and do things like that. And it's interesting whereby what we see is the evolution of the tools we use isn't just like one big leap and we're there. Very often there's a big step of innovation and then people work out how we could actually then pull that back a little bit into our IDE. So it's interesting to see something like pushing into that Claude projects, for example, and then there's this cursor space whereby you can have that conversation and it does it all for you in your IDE. And it just brings it closer to what we're more comfortable with till that step to the next place actually seems smaller. So yeah, really interesting kind of positioning things more like that now.
And I love that. I think the opportunity in the change track is to rethink our fundamental assumptions. What would make you change your mind? Now that in our context, now that machines can write code, now that machines can fill in the gaps of what you didn't tell them in the requirements.
Yeah.
What does that open up, right? What opportunities, what problems can we rethink? And then how exactly those things should become reality? That's a process. And so that absolutely resonates of how people need to try it out, and they learn, they open their eyes. It's, but I can't use that yet because like I need to maybe leave my ID, and then maybe that's in the Claude example, right? You can go to the web and you can write a bunch of things and you can build your application. But people's like, but there's all these other things I need to do and they're in my ID. Okay, can I bring that experience to me for the ID? Yeah. So I think it's awesome, and I love to see that evolution. And we do our bit over here, but it's great to see.
So let's step out of your comfort zone now of AI. Let's talk about security, Guy. If you're unsure, feel free to make it up. What are the concerns that were brought up over this last month around AI security? I know we had Tamar and obviously Caleb, whose session was around AI security, but there was some interesting mentions in Tamar's session.
So, you can take the kid out of the security industry, but you can't take the security industry out of a kid. I was quite happy actually to have security related conversations on it. We had the one with Caleb, which was clearly about security, that was designed, that was by planning. But even the conversation with Tamar, security was a big piece of it, primarily because of access to data. And so the thing to understand is in the world of LLMs, as Caleb phrased it very well, there's no separation between the control plane and the data plane. And maybe if you think about SQL, in SQL, you have the command select from table name from something. That's the structure of it. And then there says like where field equals something that is text. And that, the something that is text, that is the data, that is the data plane versus the control plane, that is the command. In LLM world, you don't have that. You just give one instruction. There's no fields. There's no structure on it. It's just language, like we humans do, right? And as a result of that, the system can't delineate very clearly what is it that you said that is data and is control. And effectively, there's no solution to that today, right? I think Caleb highlighted that, and I think I have not yet seen anyone to really devise a solution that is deterministic around that.
Yeah.
And so that leaves you in this awkward position when you're offering tools to enterprise companies, because access to data is very important. And Glean has an interesting approach to that, is that the way that they approved it is the LLM actually doesn't know any of the data. So the LLM only interacts with the control plane. It is trained on the systems. How do I go to an HR system and can extract information from it? Or how do I go to Zoom or to Gong and extract some recorded conversations from it? But then when the user asks to do that, the actions are being done using RAG. So only the relevant data per the permissions of this user in like traditional authorization are being done. That's brought into the conversation. And now only in the context of this session, the LLM knows this is the data. And so because the LLM never knows the broader data outside of that sort of context, and because fetching the data is done with the user's permissions, the eliminate, I should say that with an asterisk, right, or greatly reduce the risk of data leaking into the system and a user being able to access data that they don't have, which I thought was really interesting. So that was, I think we talked about all sorts of things security, and we should talk a bit about generating code and whether it's secure or not. But I think that was the connecting point between the Tamar episode and Caleb. And I think it's something for us to truly internalize when we think about security and LLMs.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's not, you're not allowing the LLM to effectively determine whether it is or isn't allowed to use that data. You're only providing it with the data it's allowed to use for that request, which I think is absolutely core. Now, with Caleb's session, of course, you blatantly asked the question, can an LLM provide code whereby there are no insecurities at all? And I love the answer he gave, which is based on the success of your previous company, Guy. No, it cannot produce secure code all the time.
I was just hopeful. It's like, hey, Caleb, you're a smart guy. Can you just can you give me an answer?
Yeah.
Do LLMs generate secure code or not? I think maybe part of it is indeed the tongue-in-cheek. Do humans write secure code? Shows there's definitely a need for verifying that. With Caleb, one of the many things I liked about how he phrases things is he just has this sort of concrete approach to thinking about security on it that's very practical. So he says LLMs are trained on human code. Human code, as we know, is not terribly secure, definitely not by and large. And so why would we think that generation of code that is trained on that will be more secure? So above and beyond all the fanciness of did it understand the code, not correct, like just the marching orders were all with insecure code. And so I think that was okay. And I think it's just a simple understanding that we shouldn't assume that code is secure. And then there was a layer of optimism on top of that. And I think the two takeaways that I have are, one, it will get better because we do still incentivize the LLM when we do identify this code is good and this code is bad. Treat this code as something that is better. And a bunch of the companies that train on enterprise code bases allow their users to do that as well. So say, hey, these are like golden pull requests. They're very good. And the second, which I actually personally am more excited by, is that if the machine writes the code, once you get into like autonomous workflows, then you can really embed automation of the testing into the development process. So it's not so much about whether the LLMs produce more or less secure code, but it's more about the fact that machines are not lazy. And I don't mean developers lazy in like a accusatory fashion.
Although some.
Yeah, no, amongst the team.
But
I don't mean accusatory. I just mean we're humans, right? And so we don't always deliver on all of these toil pieces that we need to do. So machines are different, right? Like machines do continue to run those, and so we can run security tests, we can fix vulnerabilities, we can do those thoroughly.
Yeah, and combining a couple of things there to talk about another topic, which is really about how LLMs combined with other ways of doing things, whether it's static analysis, whether it's the authorization that we talked about with Tamar's session. It seems that we need to really clearly recognize we need to combine it with various other technologies or ways of working, whereby the actual overall result is either far better or far more consistent execution after execution. So there are a couple of topics here. One around static analysis, which I know the swim guys, there's a really actually good quote from the swim team. I asked, if you didn't use static analysis, determining which areas of code related to which areas of documentation, how accurate would you be? How consistent would you be about saying this piece of code change actually requires changes to these other pieces of documentation? And I almost said 80% of the output that came out of an LLM-only approach to that would be noise. And actually, it was the static analysis, the creating of the AST, which then the LLM used to determine, and that linking between code and documentation, that's what actually creates that far better experience. And I think we'll see that more and more as we recognize what LLMs are good at, where they need assistance, and so forth.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's like hallucination prevention, right? It's similar
exactly.
maybe to what Des was talking about with Finn.
Absolutely.
You have to have some element of ground truth to keep the LLMs in check. Yeah, I think that was a very good insight on it, and I think a good reminder of it. And I think we had similar conversations with Caleb around how static analysis plays a role in the security side. And it's interesting to think, we talked before about this change in trust, and it's interesting to think about, on one hand, how do we get predictability? How do we get determinisms that things are not noise? And in other cases, how do we accept the lack of predictability for value? And the conversation we had there is we do static analysis today of code, say in Sneak and other solutions, and they're more deterministic. So they would find if you scan the same code with the same sort of
Right.
rule set on it, you're going to get the same set of results. But with LLMs, if you scan them, they don't act that way. Like they're statistical. So you might scan the same code 10 times, and maybe 8 times out of those 10, it finds a vulnerability, and twice it doesn't. Maybe sometimes it hallucinates a false positive. You can talk about what's better and what's not, but I think a good question is also like, how do we adapt? How do we change our methodology to that reality, right? When you run a scan and you say, hey, this is vulnerability free, if you run it with something that's statistical, can you make that statement? Can you give it the stamp of approval?
Yep.
Do you need to scan it 10 times now? How do you work with that? And I think the good challenge from Caleb was it depends on how valuable it is, right? If in those 8 times it gives you massively accurate results, maybe you make peace with that, right?
Yeah.
And you just, before you need to bless it, you scan it 3 times and you think that's good enough statistics, and I will give it a stamp of approval.
Yeah.
So I think this notion of dealing with unpredictability of these systems is really interesting.
Yeah.
And so you made a good point of how do we make them more predictable? That's one part. That's the trust piece. How do we know that they got it right? And then the other side is the change piece.
Yeah.
So I think both of those domains are really interesting.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other things that actually stood out from the session that you did with Tamar, one of which is combining types of AI. So, for example, with Glean, they have obviously a search as well. And it's that combination of symbolic AI with LLMs that actually creates that really strong power. Right. Another thing, actually, just on the point of the consistency and getting and that non-determinism, Tamar mentioned, as soon as you look to the enterprise, there are CIOs that are spending huge amounts of money on software.
Yeah.
If they ask a question today and they ask a question tomorrow or even later that day, they're paying that money and they want the same answer. And it's whether we change our mindset in terms of understanding there's power in this LLM, but you've got to expect that variance in determinism, or whether we need to add some level of consistency in as part of that. So to say, okay, we're going to use LLMs, but we want to track answers to make sure that we're giving consistency. There's work to be done one way or the other in there.
And it's how do you I paid big money for this? It better work.
So that rounds up another monthly guy. Can you believe it's, what is it now? Is it October?
Yeah.
What is it? Is we 2024 still? I can't.
In October now. Time continues to be a blurry.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
It's fun to actually have those moments and look back at the month.
Yeah.
Sometimes the month goes by in such a rush on stop a moment,
bit of reflection.
This month, I think that someone was terrible with my routines, or my wife is terrible is excellent at. That
was close. That was close, guy. I think I might leave that in the edit absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent at having a routine, sitting down at the end of the week and summarizing which is kind of taken from this week, and I'm jealous about that.
Yeah.
I'm just totally incapable of having that routine. So this is a nice forcing function.
Absolutely.
Let's look at the month and so see what
happened.
And
it's always great to talk to so many amazing people. And we've got some interesting sessions lined up as well. I had a session a little while ago with Roundup. I'm going to continue that kind of security theme into next month, and we had some good fun. Who else have we got? Oh, we've got Patrick Dubois, who's is he the godfather or the father or the grandfather or something, or the uncle or something of DevOps.
You should try grandfather. I'm sure he'd
grandfather. Yeah, the great grandfather of DevOps.
Lean into that one. Definitely the creator of DevOps Days, and I think a big force in making DevOps and kind of that dev movement come to life.
Yeah.
Looking forward to chatting a little bit about
how. So you're going to be chatting with Patrick later today, and you're going to be talking about the similarities between the cloud push and the DevOps push. How we can create reflections and similarities between that and AI native. What we can expect if it follows the same path. So that's going to be a very interesting discussion. So looking
forward to it. I think cloud native is such a great role model for AI native. And I think to me, following DevOps and cloud natives was also very significant in Snake. We didn't coin a catchphrase that for security. It's not there's no native in it. Security native conversation. I don't think it was as big a change on it. I think these lessons were so valuable in making Snake work, and how do we embed security into development. And so I'm keen to see how do we learn from those journeys and from, Patrick's wisdom and apply that to AI native.
So, Guy, let's catch up in a month and we'll talk through some of these amazing sessions again.
I'll try to ignore you for
absolutely. If I'm still here, we'll see how that
HR. We might have another co-host.
Maybe Ben will be back before we realize.
It's a good idea. Okay, problem solved.
Okay, excellent. So, Guy, we'll see you next month. And in the meantime, I'll be on LinkedIn looking for work. Thanks all for listening. Tune in next time. Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time on the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tessl.